Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Jazz Shepherd Jazz channel, where we try to discuss music and the world that music was made in, and how it influences the art, and what the art's trying to tell us. Uh, it's been a tough year for me personally. I'm going to share a few things, but my wife's been struggling with some depression, and there was even some infidelity I found out. So she's been harboring a big secret and a lie. Part of her nature is to kind of run away from things at times, then blow the bridge up. And she's really kind of spiraled into a pretty bad place. And I'm only sharing that because jazz has helped me push through. And love and romance, heartache, it's tough stuff to navigate for any of us, regardless of our color, race, historical plot, financial plight in life. Heartache, it's kind of universal. And I just want to share because jazz teaches you how to overcome, how to not feel sorry for yourself, how to be forgiving, how to live in a difficult world, how to let your soul speak so you can find a peace. And like I said, it's been tough sometimes this year. I just found out about some of the stuff that was happening in the last month, which releases a lot of the suspicion and tension and allows some of the healing to start. But it was also really rough waters finding some of that stuff out. Some days are better than others. So what the root of her depression, though, was some infidelity. And my wife has personality issues. And, I mean, she's struggling. And she has good days and she has really bad days. And the really bad days want to make her run from the mistakes she's made and the witnesses to those mistakes. And I'm only sharing, like I said, not to put her business out there or my business out there, but to say that jazz does have this power. It has this amazing contextual healing power. That if you recognize how this art was born and what it was bred and raised up in and how it liberated a people and how it medicated the soul and the man's condition. And when you can hear that, when you listen to it, even as the audience, when the shaman carved that mask of protection, he also brought protection to his village with that mask. And I often share about the shaman carving the mask when I talk about virtuosity. But there's also the duality of that mask that, aside from the metaphor of the virtuosity, is the fact that it does offer protection, healing. And for the player, it gives them the immediacy of their expression. But for the listener, it also provides that comprehension of understanding that there is healing and that there is intercession on my behalf and that others understand and have been through tough waters. And for those who don't remember the virtuosity metaphor, a lot of the great players of today, and I think this starts really in the 70s and 80s with a lot of those great players. A lot of them were driven by ego, intellect, and virtuosity. And the era of the great blues and swing era guys that came up in abject poverty, and a lot of them are uneducated musicians who just learned to play by soul, by spirit, by blues. That gives way to, in both the black and white community, a more educated class. As the black migration moved north, there was black high schools, black universities, black music programs. And so a guy like Herbie Hancock comes out with a lot of intellect. And there's composition and arrangement that comes to the fore. And the shaman who carved that great mask back in Africa, his intent was never to be ego-driven, to be a great carver. He carved that mask to be a great protector. And by virtue of carving many masks to be a better and better protector of himself and his village from the evil spirits at night, as a byproduct, he became an amazing carver. And the great blues and jazz players of the 20s, 30s, 40s, into the 50s, those guys were struggling through such difficult waters that the music was a place of shelter and safety. They would play for 10, 12 hours a day. You read how they would just sit there in their apartment or on the bridge or at a park and just sit there and play in their horn, because it was a place of safety, a place of serenity, a place of calm, a place of healing, a place of how can I deal with my day-to-day. At least here I can, it gets it off. And as a byproduct of that constant healing and that constant playing to find safety from the evil spirits at night, virtuosity arrives. But virtuosity, for the sake of virtuosity, our virtuosity driven by ego and intellect. Look at me. Looks and sounds very different than virtuosity driven by the spirit of, I had no other choice but to play because my soul needs it. And so a lot of the music of that era touches me and moves me so powerfully. And a lot of the later stuff leaves me feeling quite empty and blank. And the modern day stuff, I mean, I have not heard all of it, but for me, a lot of it comes up just feeling very intellect virtuosity. Look at me, how good a player I am. And it speaks less about a people in the wilderness following a burning bush, trying to find redemption, trying to find a promised land. But again, the other part of that mask is that it does provide protection to the village. And I'm part of that village as a listener of jazz. And it really has helped me through some difficult times. And me and my wife, our saga's not finished. And I don't know how it's going to end. I mean, there's some recognition of some real underlying issues going on. And hopefully now that we have kind of a thumbprint on something, it'll give us a platform from which to work from versus just kind of swinging at things in the dark. But there's a darkness, there's a negative side of her at times that she has a hard time suppressing or even recognizing when it comes over her. And keep me in your thoughts. Keep us in your thoughts and prayers. I hope me and her can work this out, because we've been together 10 years, and 7 of those 10 years were 7 of the best years of my life. We were soulmates, and still are. I mean, teenage kids, the pandemic, economic stresses, opening a business, all these things kind of helped her spiral into a place where she made bad choices, and then those bad choices were hard to undo, and her pride and her stubbornness made her want to march forward like, I know what I'm doing, no one's going to tell me what to do. And it's caused a lot of hurt. And she hurt no one more than herself. I mean, she's really in a tough place. And hearing some of her suicidal thoughts and like some of her pain, it's hard. And I've hurt too. But again, I'm only sharing because I want to talk about that. Every day I was able to get up and come down here and do this. And jazz was a big part of that. We have an incredible fly epidemic here in town right now. It's this late summer, all the dairy farms around here, boy, the flies, they're thick. I must kill 30 of them a day right now. Pretty annoying, to be honest. But we're going to move on. I listened to this record the other day, and I do these 6-packs, where I pull 6 records, one off each cabinet. And you guys, I've probably done a few episodes on it, you've probably seen some of them. This was from the other day. I just wanted to share it because it's a fantastic Mobley record. Art Farmer's on the trumpet, along with Horace Silver, Doug Watkins, Art Blakey. And so with Mobley, Silver, Watkins, Blakey, a lot of Jazz Messenger alum. Silver, Watkins, and Mobley, of course, went off with Silver when they first became independent. This is one of Mobley's first LPs as a leader at Blue Note. I think it's the second, if I remember correct, 1550. And this is a Japanese pressing of it. But it's a really great listen. I listened probably 3 times of the day. Farmer's quite succinct and bright and enunciates with some ferocity and fierceness in a hard bop Blue Note kind of way where you don't often hear Art Farmer. And you'd think it was Bird at times or even a Morgan at times the way Farmer's playing. Because Farmer's often far more cloudy and milky and soft and blowing with less intensity. Mobley's pretty fierce here. I mean, the middleweight champion of the tenor, he's a heavyweight in a lot of ways, it's his tone that was middleweight. But in terms of his emoting and his experience, and few people's records go for more in the Blue Note canon than Mobley's LPs, and yet the man died penniless on the streets. I think he got some work late in his life live, but like he went through some very tough, lean years. I just wanted to share that, even though it's not part of today's six-pack. And this is actually yesterday's six-pack, so it's all stuff I've already gone through. We're going to go through it rather quickly, because I already had the longer share. Sam Jones, fantastic bass player. This is a Riverside, also a Japanese pressing, number 324. Probably puts in 1959-60. These were almost always recorded in New York. Great Nat Adderley, Cannonball's younger brother. The great Blue Mitchell. So you have a trumpet and cornet there with Jimmy Heath and then Bobby Timmons. So you have a fiery lineup with Adderley and Mitchell and Jimmy Heath and Timmons. Again, some Blue Note, Jazz Messenger alum in that. Fantastic record. Sam Jones was akin to a Wendell Marshall at Savoy or a Paul Chambers at Blue Note. He played on a lot of records for Orrin Keep News and Bill Grauer at Riverside. And he was a fantastic musical mind as well. And a lot of his records later in his life are fairly complex pieces. A very brilliant musician, but also a fantastic accompanist and a real well-toned player with some real ideas and vision. Sometimes your bass players and drummers, your rhythm guys, given lead projects, it sounds a bit like a bass player drummer leading a project. Sam Jones is a guy with vision. That's a tough record to come by. Relaxing with Miles Davis. I actually didn't get to this one yesterday, but I'll put it on next. It's part of the great Miles quintet recording session, those 4 albums that come from the 2 days of recordings in 55. Of course, the great quintet, Paul Chambers, Red Garland, Coltrane. I mean, the whole assemblage of who did I miss? Bass player Chambers, drummer Philly Joe Jones, along with Coltrane and Miles. Great quintet. Short-lived in a lot of ways. Like, as great as and as much of a legacy as that group left, it's really 54 into 56 that group is functioning. By 57, the lineup's starting to be tinkered with. It's a sextet at times with Cannonball Adderley. The great quintet only has, Miles, the blue cover, these 4, Crooked, Stephen Work and Relaxin', and then the early work at Columbia. You would think this would be more of an assemblage of ballads with the name Relaxing with, but it's not really. They all have similar mixes of blues, up-tempos, slow tempos, but some ferocious hard bop, some great blues playing, again, based off a lot of the American songbook and standards, influenced heavily by Clifford Brown Max Roach Quintet, which was cooking things up at Emersy. I mean, people want to think that this was leading the pack, but it's really Clifford Brown Max Roach that's leading things here, and this group's kind of following those footsteps. If I could write a book, If I Were a Bell, Oleo, it's just, good stuff. You're My Everything, It Could Happen to You, Woody and You. It's good stuff. Great stuff. Fantastic record here by Tal Farlow, the great guitar player, nicknamed the Octopus. Tall man, I think he was like 6'3" or so. Giant hands, which is why they called him the Octopus. Those tentacles of fingers allowed him to play interesting chords and to effortlessly play some chords that some players struggle to play. Very nimble, very dexterous player, well-enunciated player. I'm a huge fan of Tal Farlow. His recordings for Norman Granz and Verve are premium jazz guitar sessions. And this record comes with in a trio format with the fantastic Eddie Costa, who's a vibraphonist / piano player. One of the most important piano players really of the 50s. He's on 100 records as a side guy. There's maybe 5 records as a leader on various labels. But Eddie Costa's name will show up everywhere. And if you Google him and look at his achievements, the guy's on a lot of really great records. And he's a fierce vibraphonist, but as a piano player is where he really is unique. He has a strong left hand on the lower half of the piano that plays some very interesting things. If you ever listen to his record House of Blue Lights on Dot, it's one of the most fascinating piano records you'll ever hear. I think it's a quintet actually, but he's the lead guy. There's some really fantastic rumbling in the middle and low keys, and the upper right hand's actually doing more of the comping at times. It's ambidextrous feeling and playing. But so you have Vinnie Burke on the bass. Vinnie was a great bass player. He does a lot of work at Bethlehem. He's in various combos. He backs up the Chris Connor group. I mean, I just love Vinnie Burke as well. And this Bethlehem 10-inch is really worth seeking out. But Tal Farlow's work at Verve Norgran is really fantastic, mid-50s stuff, and should be sought out. What we've been listening to in a group I never hesitate to talk about is the Three Sounds. It's prototypical coffee shop jazz music. It's never devoid of spirit, blues, and feeling. Gene Harris pounds out the grooves. The backing group is just fantastic. Simpkins and Dowdy. It's just one of the great piano trios of that era. Someone like the Ramsey Lewis trio, where there's a lot of rhythm and blues coming through it, a lot of black church coming through it. It's gospel, it's cocktails, it's martinis, it's beers, it's throwing darts. It's fun, but it's still got an amen in there. I mean, it's not bland, it's not blanched, it's not without nutrients. And there's piano trio stuff that gets to be very pasty and pastel. This has some guts to it. And Harris, of course, is just a revelation, one of the finest players whose career extends well into the 2000s, if I recall. He's making great records in the 80s with Ray Brown at Concord. I mean, I love Gene Harris's body of work. I have all of his Blue Note stuff and some of his Mercury Limelight stuff. And then he ends up on a lot of other different labels at a point. But, I mean, you can't go wrong with Gene Harris. You can't go wrong with the Three Sounds. And all those early Blue Note Three Sounds records that are out there for decent prices, those are records worth having. I've said it a dozen times. The records you can put on when you have friends over. And when they say, I want to put a jazz record on, and you put on this, no one will leave the room, I promise you. This is the jazz that people want to hear, want to party to, want to hang out, to have a cocktail to. And most of us just don't recognize that this is the stuff that most people will feel comfortable with. And there's enough blues and soul in it that people will feel it, and it won't feel empty. It'll feel satisfied. So, great record. Like I said, I love all the Three Sounds records. The other end of that spectrum, and kind of the epitome of cool, is Dave Brubeck. And this is a Brubeck quartet session. Doesn't look like Paul Desmond's even in this group here. Him and Desmond left side each other at times. Let's see the people are. Joe Morello's on the drums, Eugene Wright's on the bass, and I'm not sure who the other player is, but I listened to this 3 times yesterday. Really good stuff, and it's actually a pretty cool cover. It is the red vinyl Fantasy. This record comes out in like 61 or 60, 3301. It comes out well after he's left Fantasy. So he's been at Columbia now for probably 3-4 years, having huge hit records. And so Fantasy keeps unearthing stuff in their vaults from when Brubeck was with them and reissuing it, because the Brubeck name was so big at this point that it was a financial windfall for Fantasy to keep issuing anything they had by Brubeck. So again, this is kind of an after the fact session, and Brubeck and Fantasy did have a bit of a falling out. The Weiss brothers had promised Brubeck one thing contractually, including a kind of a part ownership of Fantasy Records, and he found out that he really only owned part of his own music and not all of it even. And so he went to Columbia with a cloud of dust left behind at Fantasy. And Fantasy, of course, gets a rebirth with Creedence Clearwater Revival, which kind of puts them back on the map and makes them financially soluble. And it's after that kind of boom that Fantasy starts buying up a lot of the other jazz labels like Contemporary and Prestige catalog, the Riverside catalog, the debut. They already had debut, but they're putting that stuff out as the OJC series. So Fantasy is an important label out of San Francisco. But great stuff by Brubeck. And again, it's light, even in compared to the beautiful soul of the Three Sounds. This is a bit more of a confection. And they're eating ice cream because this is as cool is. I mean, there's really nothing cooler than Take 5. You want to know what cool jazz is? Take 5. Boom, done. Got it. That's it. And then a great record here by the great Wynton Kelly on Vee-Jay, a label out of the Chicago area, Chicagoland. I think they were originally in Gary, Indiana, which is just on the south side of Chicago, across the border there. Wynton Kelly's a great player. I guess it's a Japanese pressing of this. It is. I listened to this yesterday twice. I can't remember how big the band is, if I'm honest. Part of when you're running a business, you don't always have time to think about everything. I think this might be a trio, but it could be a bigger group as well. But Wynton Kelly, he's such a rhythmic player. He always has control of his band. And Miles Davis loved that about Wynton Kelly. When Wynton was with his group, Miles could leave the stage and leave Wynton up there to do his thing, and Wynton could keep an audience enraptured. He was a very compelling, he just made you feel. I love Wynton Kelly. He has 2 or 3 records at Vee-Jay. And when Vee-Jay launches, they do some really great jazz work for a brief period. 57, 58, 59, right in there. There's some really good titles there. Almost 25, 30 of some of the best talent. Wayne Shorter, Lee Morgan, Paul Chambers. It's a pretty impressive little bands they assemble there. Wynton Kelly of talent that Vee-Jay, and then of course I think part of why they go a different direction is they licensed the first Beatles record out of England that no one here in America wanted to issue, and they're like, no, we're not going to deal with that British group. And Vee-Jay's like, yeah, we'll put it out. So those early Vee-Jay copies of Please Please Me sold Beatlemania well, and Vee-Jay's direction I think was forever kind of changed by that. But it was a black owned and run label, and I'm not sure if it still was at that time in the 60s, but I think it was. So that's my 6-pack for today. I did mention recently that I had the Toshiko record purchased. It came. It's in lovely condition. Beautiful piece. Like I said, I think it's the last piece of the Verve Canon that I did not have. You saw this cover in one of my Verve episodes, and this is the Jazz Scene LP version. I had the 10-inch box, which you saw. This is the LP format, which comes out early in the Verve 8100 sequence, or I can't see the number there. 8060, 8060. So like early Verve, probably 57. This comes out. Fantastic. It's a compilation. I remember the original 78 version of this was pretty groundbreaking. Really shook things up. And the 10-inch version was also really nicely done. And here's the LP version of it. It's a great photograph. A record worth grabbing. And you got everyone from Parker to Machito, Ralph Burns, Neil Hefti, Lester Young, Coleman Hawkins. Duke Ellington. Some giants. So some cool stuff. One last piece I do want to show you. Actually, 2. There's a Django Reinhardt Clef 10-inch. When I did my series on the 10 inches of Clef, I did not have this yet. And I did finally get this, also in nice shape. And then this also was a screenshot in my episode. And this is a real Bernard Pfeiffer, the French piano player. That's a 10-inch of that. So I'm getting closer and closer to finishing off all those Clef and Nordgren 10 inches. So we're going to wrap today's episode up with that. Keep me in your thoughts and prayers. Pray for my wife. It's a little personal sharing some of that stuff, but I think it's important, the message that I'm getting across is that jazz does have a tangible power for us as we approach that art form. If we have an empathy in our hearts and get it, it's powerful stuff. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't. If you want to support this channel and what we're trying to share here, please go to my Patreon page in the description below and pledge a few dollars a month. It all helps. Could really use a few more pledges. We've lost some in the last few months. And again, it's been tough making content this last year with some of the emotional chaos in my soul and my heart. I've trudged through it, and you have to overcome. But there's probably been some episodes where I haven't been quite myself, and that's why. And so I'm trying to get back on top of things, and we've had some good days lately. We've had some tough ones as well. But just know I appreciate you all, the love and support and the community that I have here. And it's great having people from around the country show up. I had a friend from D.C. come in the other day, Peter Lewis, and we sat here and talked for 3 hours. The energy was just incredible. Just incredible. A friend from Minneapolis came down the other day. His name was Jeff. We sat here and talked jazz for 3 hours. Fantastic. My good friend Justin was down from Minneapolis the other day. We sat here, we're just best friends, so we sat here talking like old friends. But life is good. Life is good. And we'll keep trudging along, making it through all this. Appreciate you all, like I said. We'll talk to you all soon. Peace.